Hello, everyone, and welcome to Classical Revolution on IDAGIO. My name is Rachel Fenlon, and I'm your host of the series. And for those of you tuning in for the first time today, the series here is all about boundary pushing and what risk-taking is in classical music. And I explore these questions with my weekly guests, on all of whom are people who really inspire me to think outside the box. I'm so excited to welcome my guest today. He's the current vice president of Pentatone Music. He's the artistic director of Festival de l'Anaudière in Canada. He studied musicology and he held positions with the L'Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal with Kent Nagano, as well as positions with Deutsche Grammophon as the director of the French vocal division. So please welcome Renaud Loranger. Hi, Renaud.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you. This is a very humbling introduction.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. We're so happy to have you.
This is exciting. Thank you for asking me.
Renaud, I love to start off the interviews just right away asking my guests what their introduction to music was and what the first moments of music and that spark were for them.
Well, that's an easy one, actually, and it's really not scripted. But obviously, I grew up in the countryside outside of Montreal in l'Anaudière. I do not come from a musical family. There was no music in the house, not really anyway. But there was this really incredible summer festival, already very active and ambitious in the 80s and 90s. And that was kind of the thing to do, you know. People went there on weekends because it was a big sort of attraction, and unavoidably, there was nothing else really competing with it. So I went there very early on. I heard countless concerts there over several summers. I have memories of some of them. I know that I attended some very exciting ones I have no recollection of because honestly I was too little. But this was the channel very early on, and obviously it became a big passion. And as a teenager and as a young adult, it became the sort of defining element of my life.
Wonderful. And so you went on to study. Did you? I didn't read whether you have an instrumental background or you went straight into musicology, or how did that happen?
I mean, I had. That's a funny thing. I took piano lessons for maybe 10 or 12 years, but never on a very, very serious basis. I did not seriously pursue performance. Mm-hmm. However, at university, or when the time came, the choice presented itself between performance and musicology, and I very clearly selected musicology because I didn't want to practice so much, you know. So, that's true, and it was a fine choice in the sense that it also gave me a chance to. I don't want to say pursue other interests, but maybe be a little more worldly about things and go about introduction to professional life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Renaud, you have a very interesting role in the music industry in that you have positions both in the recording world and in the festival world. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about those roles and how they go hand in hand, whether they go hand in hand, or what that's like going between the two roles.
Well, it's a really, really fantastic and indeed very privileged position that I have now. I have been in the recording industry now for almost a decade, which is terrifying because it also kind of happened. It happened by chance, you know, like so many other things. First, I moved to Berlin, and I met wonderful then colleagues at Deutsche Grammophon who asked if I would be interested to take on a position there, and it had never crossed my mind, that I would work in the recording industry. But I said, yes, of course, absolutely. Same happened a few years later with Pentatone, at which point the flexibility, the freedom, artistically speaking, that I was being offered played a big role in my jumping ships, as it were. But I was always, I always remained very, very connected and interested in the live side of things. I mean, actually, when I was a DG towards the end, even before Pentatone appeared in the picture, I thought, well, I can probably stay another couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years, finish some things I care about, but eventually the time will come for me to go back to the stage, as it were. I like to say that when I get a little upset about my studio life, I focus more on the festival, and when I get a little upset about the festival, I focus more on the studio work, which is indeed a very, a very privileged situation. They to be fair, I don't think they overlap so much. I think the record strategy or artistic development for a label, to a large extent, has to reflect the reality of the performing world. It has to document what is deemed to be important today, what is deemed to be representative of music making in our time. But the dynamics are so very different. That's what my first experiences now at La Naudière have shown, that in the studio, and that's why recording is also so difficult for the artists. I mean, in the studio, you are in a very preserved, safe environment in a way.
Yes.
But there is no feedback from an audience. There is nothing in that sense. And to be at the festival now last summer for my first season and spend 5 weeks there, being in the audience all the time, listening to people, how they react, how they eat up, what's being performed, and how excited they are, and how they express their excitement, how they applaud, and then just go home, and then it's over. There's no document, there's no anxiety, post-production anguish.
Post-production, true, yes.
So I mean, I guess you could say they are complementary in a way, because they are in practice very, very different.
Very different.
They don't overlap otherwise. Yeah.
Something that you just said just caught my ear, which is that you said that the recording industry is based off of what we deem, the performance industry, what we deem is important. But how do we define that? Or how does that process work? That's interesting to me. What comes before what?
That is my humble plight. And I don't think we find definitive answers, of course. I think we try our best. We follow our own, I speak for myself, but I also speak for other colleagues. I think we follow our own sensitivities unavoidably, sensibilities also. And we also kind of try to put something together that reflects the way we listen to the world. But that's the exciting bit also, that I listen to the world in one way, which is really unique and will not be the way of anyone else. I mean, the same goes for artists. That's also what makes this connection and this ongoing discussion, let's say, about projects, about possibilities, about casting, about repertoire itself. That's what makes it so nourishing and so lively over time. But it is a defining question. And obviously, if you look at it from a label's executive point of view, you try very much still to keep a sense of what make sense commercially,
Right.
without compromising on artistic endeavors, and that's really quite a balancing act, I have to say. At Pentatone, we have the very good fortune that we're able to focus on the music and the music making and on the artists primarily. With that said, everyone has to pay their bills. That's also true. So, it's a sort of ongoing. Yeah, I think a balancing act is a good phrase.
Yeah. And in what sense do you mean that you have that you have the good fortune at Pentatone? Is it because there are certain financial things that are supported, or?
I think it's more that we from the onset anyway. I mean, I've already been there for a little over 4 years now, but we said that we do not hold unrealistic expectations as to what the market can produce today or will produce today. So it really informs our thinking. It informs the way we make business decisions. It informs the overall strategy. It informs the calculations we make. Of course, we try to be conservative. And indeed, I mean, I would quote one of my most sympathetic and the closest friends on the agenting side. This is still, anyway, even at the highest levels, a relatively marginal business. Breaking even comfortably is already a definition of success. But in order to do that, you need to also accept it as such. And that's a very easy, I would say today it's easy in a way, because if you're into making money primarily, you will take a completely different direction, which is not to say that it's wrong. I mean, I'm really not saying this as a sort of, this should not sound dismissive to what our colleagues do at other labels or in other parts of the business, who have a much more sort of kind of pop oriented approach to things. But that's not what Pentatone's philosophy and values are.
Yeah, I see. That's interesting, because then, as you say, you when you accept that, you adjust your business model to that, and then there's freedom within that. Yeah. Renaud, I read you sent me some nice essays before our conversation this week, and I really enjoyed reading them. And in one of them, you talk about the technical explosion, and you talk about what that might, or what that has, or what you feel it could disrupt or challenge within our musical industry. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think we're already seeing it. We've already seen it. If you look at the recording side of things, which is, let's say, one aspect of it. I mean, even in our lifetime, we've seen different formats for recordings. We've seen older formats come back, the vinyl, which is still incredible. And we're obviously moving towards complete dematerialization of the supports for recorded music. I suspect we will keep, to some extent, we will still print CDs or LPs in the future, because you do have a certain segment of the population of the listening public who likes to collect and own physical objects. But I think the extent of the disruption there is quite huge, and it's not necessarily bad. It's just a sort of normal evolution. But in terms of the, I think what you're referring to with regards to this piece of writing I shared with you was it's more about the fact that I often think that we, not only as artists and musicians or as an industry, but as societies altogether, I mean, we need to try and really not ignore the fact that we have to think very seriously about the environmental question. We have to think about artificial intelligence and see what the possibilities and the threats can be, and I would say try to have perhaps a little more active discussion or more active public political discussion about these issues than what we're seeing now, and the not to get ahead of ourselves, but obviously, let's say this is becoming even more acute in this period that we're living through.
Yeah, and I mean, what I'm curious about is how you yourself, I mean, personally, could imagine. I mean, where do you feel the hope lies, or I mean, it's hard to say where you feel the future lies, for example, but where do you feel the hope might lie in the evolution of music within this sort of very technological future?
Yeah. Let me give you an easy answer to that. I try anyway.
Okay.
I think obviously there will be challenges also for all of us. Some of them are becoming very, very visible already. But the core of what musicians do remains and does not change and should not change. I mean, this is not, I'm not trying to be, I'm not countering, let's say, evolution. That's not really the point, but it's just that we also need to keep in mind the fact that it is, let's say, about great music making and communication with an audience that involves a certain space and a certain time and the vibration of the air. That's basically, physically speaking, what it comes down to. So technology can offer us a lot of palliative options, or hopefully supportive options in bringing music to wider audiences. But my hope lies in the resilience of the artists and of all of us, by extension. The essence of what they do remains, and it's really what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're experiencing this right now in a very extreme way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So it's about the resilience. It's almost to stick with that integrity, or stick with what you're.
Absolutely, and integrity, I think, is a very, very important word, a very important idea. And I think most performers can relate to that very easily. I mean, they spend their lives with scores, trying to be themselves and channel very often, not always, but very often channel other people's music. I think, I mean, again, which does not mean that in the short to midterm, we will not be looking probably at different formats, or I'm talking a little bit more as a festival director now, but I think that's also possible. But I do hope that anyway we come out of this extreme trial with a more acute sense of what it is that we do and why it matters to meet an audience and present it with music making. But then again, I mean, maybe it will mean smaller audiences in the foreseeable future. Maybe it will be also different formats, which is not necessarily bad. I mean, I have to say at the festival, of course, the setting is very specific. It's outdoors. It's a very, very big sort of, we've got very large grounds. It's very informal. It's very relaxed. I get a little nervous, let's say, if we go above 90 minutes of music per program. Let's say, of course, we will present operas in concert, obviously, or single, sometimes single works like Mahler 3 we did last summer.
Okay.
That obviously happens, but if we've got a sort of more traditional, overture, concerto, symphony kind of package, I also try for it not to be too long. And sometimes it's okay. Sometimes we'll clock in at 70 minutes and it's perfectly fine. You know what I mean? Nobody feels that they haven't heard enough. Maybe the intermission will be a little longer. They can have more time. They can have another glass of wine. That's also fine. So I think in a way, if we're kind of forced, I guess. But if we're forced to look into that right now, and perhaps for the foreseeable future, perhaps for parts of next season even, that's okay. Creativity abounds.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose it's also, it's a unique opportunity in a way, because we're presented with certain limitations to look at. I mean, it allows us some objectivity on what we do right now.
Yeah.
So, actually, let's talk a little bit about your festival. You mentioned to me a little earlier that let's talk about the festival. So, I think you found a solution for this summer.
Well, actually, we I mean, it's a sort of, it's just connected to the circumstances. Obviously, we had to cancel our season around the middle of April already.
Yeah.
Because the government in Quebec asked us to do that, which at the time felt extremely frustrating, because I thought we could certainly hold on another 5-6 weeks and see what, how things developed and so on. Obviously, it was inevitable. So it was inevitable. I mean, we were going to do Aida, we were going to do first act of Valkyrie. What else? Das Paradies und die Peri by Schumann. We had 2 visiting orchestras from Europe, so all kinds of things which obviously would not really have been very practical right now. But so we will have a virtual offer in July and into the beginning of August, actually, which will present, I mean, it's a very lovely idea. We just sort of opened up the archives, also in partnership with the Radio Canada, the national television, who used to film quite a bit in the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s. And we've selected about 15 programs, also based on our own archival recordings, video recording, that go from 1986 to last summer, basically. And so the details will be announced pretty soon. And I just thought in the end, okay, I mean, that's quite a great thing to present. I mean, some of these concerts have not been seen since their original broadcast, let's say 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And it tells the story of the festival. Obviously, it shows us what it's been. It shows us what it is today, and we can also kind of use this as a way to stay. I mean, this will sound very, cliche, but indeed to stay connected with our community, with our audience, with our artistic family. It's
Yeah.
cliche, but it's only cliche because it's true. And I
Well,
think
exactly.
in
I
this time
mean,
we need that really. Yeah.
yeah, and particularly it sounds with a festival like La Naudier, which is really a community. It sounds it's a very much a big part of your community.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And it
yeah.
plays a role. It plays a role really. I mean, you need to think. It's not very far outside of Montreal. It's about an hour's drive.
Mhm.
A little more, I'm being told now, with sort of modern day traffic and so on. But it's not very far out of the city, so it's accessible. But it's still really in the countryside. I mean, it's in the middle of a kind of sort of forest, which dives into a little valley, and we've got this extraordinary venue, this extraordinary amphitheater, which really
Mhm.
kind of replicates in a very, very clever, distant way the Greek models. You know, it doesn't look like a Greek amphitheater, but it feels like one. It's really a wonderful thing. And yeah, I mean, you know, it also raises other questions about what approach we take in a situation like this one. Um, about, you know, cancellation fees or things like that. I mean, obviously it is difficult for everyone. It's also difficult for institutions,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But again, I'm a diehard optimist anyway. I think that over time we will play again or we'll meet again.
Oh yes. I mean, in the end, I think that's not really in question, is it? I
No,
feel
I don't
it's not
think so.
in question.
No.
It's much more what we do
Yeah.
with this time, which you already alluded to, is that we can be creative in this time.
Yeah, I don't think, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's not in question. I think it's the issue is that there's so much uncertainty right now, so much,
Yeah.
so many things are quite unstable, and people are rightfully worried, and a great many of us are really tragically, catastrophically deprived from any income, which is really unthinkable. So there's obviously a lot of anxiety, and but I think it's important. I think under normal circumstances it's difficult to do, even more so now. But it's important that we try, all of us together, to project ourselves into a just sort of slightly more distant future, and try to keep in mind that whatever the events, I mean, obviously, you know, we haven't had to deal with anything comparable in our lifetimes. Our parents mostly, probably not. Our grandparents, I mean, some of them will have known a lot of disruption, especially in Europe in the 20th century. But you know, it's still very exceptional and very unique. But if you take a step back, you can also kind of look at it and say, okay, it does happen eventually that something goes wrong. But what I really like right now, and this also doesn't get discussed very much, but what I kind of take from the situation in the first place is that obviously the world is incredibly closely knit and incredibly interconnected, and I think that's very beautiful. I think that's a very beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful realization to make. So yeah, I guess that's it. I'm optimistic.
Right. And so in this sense, it also ties back to what you were saying about kind of coming together versus in this time coming together, because we are interconnected in the way that we are. So it is an opportunity to embrace that in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, the potential is there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you'll see, let's say, uh, in on the recording side of things, again, I mean, there's some very big question marks there, because let's say we don't necessarily have all the data yet, but we expect to see that the physical sales worldwide will probably plummet. That people will kind of fall back on digital consumption. I mean, these are trends that are already, very, very vastly underway, but probably they will only become more obvious and sharper, given the situation. But at the same time, again, the essence of, let's say, going into the studio and making music for posterity, that absolutely does not change. And the wonderful thing I'm seeing right now is that a lot of artists are coming up. Obviously, most people have time on their hands. Most people are free. Most people have seen cancellations way into the fall and even into next year. Which also for recordings opens up all kinds of incredible possibilities immediately in the very short term, which normally is not the case.
Yeah.
If you're looking
Yes.
at sort of larger scale productions, sometimes they will take years to put together because, of course, you want certain people to record, and you need to make sure
Exactly.
it's available and so on. Well, the truth is that right now everyone is available.
Yeah.
And we had, let's say, we've been fortunate in that we haven't had too many projects directly impacted in the spring, but we had to postpone a couple of larger scale projects.
Yeah.
And much to my astonishment, at this point, let's say we're in the middle of June, they're all rescheduled or about to be rescheduled for later this year. And under any normal circumstances, this would never have been possible, But you see that people also miss this, and they want to reconvene and make music together, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. And just that itself, it's enough hope, actually, because it's and I think, I mean, it's curious to hear you say that there's a sort of plummet in the recording industry, because and maybe that's obviously my own naivety, but I would imagine that in a time like this, in fact, that there would be a bigger demand for recording. And I've noticed myself that I take more time because I have the time. I have a CD player and I never use it. And now I just sit down and I listen to an entire CD, and that changed for me. I mean, I can't be the only one experiencing this right now. So
I swear to you that you aren't.
Yeah, thank you.
With that said, let's say again, we'll have to see. We'll have to wait a little bit to look at the results of the first half of the year, basically. But the fact remains that the physical ownership or the dynamics of that has changed very, very vastly. We're a little concerned that we might see in certain territories, certain countries that are still otherwise quite active buyers of physical products, that if shops, let's say, have been closed for a number of weeks or months, sometimes smaller shops in even smaller towns, not all of them might reopen, for instance, and it kind of makes it even more difficult to maintain a distribution network in place. But obviously the numbers for consumption through the digital channels, including IDAGIO, obviously, they're really shooting through the roof right now. So this is obviously something that is kind of, it makes sense, and it was to be expected also. I have to say, I even have an LP player now here, which is incredible. I stream a lot of music. I stream a lot more than I did before the pandemic started. So I guess I'm also a sort of very easy case study of contemporary consumption. But of course, I stream music. I do listen to a lot of things for fun, but I also obviously use the various channels professionally, let's say, which is not exactly the same. Yeah.
Well, this is, and I'm not saying this because we're on their channel, but this is this is truly the best for classical music. So
well said.
It's, well, the archival content is just so huge. And then also a friend and I the other day were talking about just the quality of the lossless sound is also fantastic. So, but I mean, I'm just saying that.
No, but let's say, I mean, objectively speaking, again, the commitment to quality is essential. And I guess that's basically the end of it, the beginning and the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think indeed we need to just be clear about that and try as much, and sometimes it's very hard for all of us, but try not to sacrifice, not to compromise. Again, going back to integrity.
Yes,
that's exactly what it's about. And again, I mean, I think we're, you know, even in times or even more so in times like these, you just have to be relevant, and to be relevant, you need to be yourself, obviously. So
yeah,
voila.
And I mean, on that note, which is interesting, I mean, we're seeing something major happening in North America right now. And in terms of relevance, how much, okay, and I'm asking you specifically as like the director of a festival, how much responsibility do you feel or how much responsibility do you feel in showing sort of solidarity with like political issues or human issues, or, you know, this, what we're seeing, this enormous uprising in the United States right now? Where does that responsibility lie for you? Or how does that sit with you?
That's a very crucial question. I think it lies at the center of what we do. Absolutely. I always say that ultimately I feel that the reason why we're doing what we're doing is because we believe fundamentally that peace is possible. And it's not only possible, it's a goal worthy of striving towards every day. Which doesn't mean, you know, we don't want to be successful in other ways. I mean, of course, I'm happy to have very full houses at the festival. I'm happy to have albums landing on the charts. I mean, you know, that's very clear. But if you take everything away, I think that certainly is valid for me. The belief that it's a belief in the possibility of peace, which means it's a belief in mankind as a whole. And obviously, I think it depends then very much, if you're looking at it from an institutional perspective, on the context in which and the communities in which you operate. You can elect to be a little more active or outspoken, maybe in certain situations. But let's just say the dignity of human beings is just paramount to everything. And again, I think the belief in the beauty of music, the beauty of art, and the beauty of life itself, these are all driving forces. So, and ultimately, I think that by bringing people, of course, by bringing people towards the the contemplation of beauty, hopefully we achieve a greater sense of, call it whatever you want to call it, community, togetherness, openness, tolerance, which is to me again so essential. Wisdom, which are all very sort of humanistic. I guess. I mean, this is very serious. My God, humanistic. No. That's great. Humanistic concerns and I mean, hopefully also try to contribute towards people's openness of and positions, and hopefully moving towards greater inclusion.
Yes.
If that's the thing. But I think we're all at the same time quite upset by some of what's going on in the world right now, and it's challenging. I mean, it's very challenging. But then again, I would bring us back to what I said earlier, and the idea that in fact the level of connection has never been greater, perhaps. I mean, my pain in which is very deep in watching some of the current events unfold. It does echo the pain of people here in Berlin, but also people in Montreal, and the US, and the UK, and France, otherwise in Germany, in Asia. And this is only what I'm seeing, let's say, on a daily basis through my own networks. And again, I'm thinking there must be there must be a way to kind of federate these forces and really try to evolve and move towards a greater good. I mean, I think also from a more kind of practical editorial point of view, let's say, it's important also to think about what I just saw that Philadelphia Orchestra appointed its first African American female musician today. At least it was announced today, and I thought this is great. This is great. Then you kind of step back and say, okay, is it really the first one? Oh God, But it's important, very very important now that these steps are being taken, and I think also we can certainly take steps in that direction.
Yeah. Exactly. I love that, and that your optimism is very inspiring and beautiful. So thank you.
I try my best, but absolutely no. But it's also faith. It's faith in mankind ultimately. Yeah. It's faith in all of us. There's someone I'm reading quite frantically right now, because obviously I mean I don't travel, I don't go out in the evening, I don't who's a philosopher from the 20th century, a French philosopher called Renaud Loranger, and I just read again an interview transcript from the 50s, I think, which is also interesting. I mean, the 50s are not very far. That was not that long ago, but obviously people were concerned in the 50s with the proliferation of nuclear weapons and the Cold War, and what it could potentially mean for Europe and for the rest of the world. And that was a very big deal at the time, obviously.
Yeah.
And he said something in that interview which I find absolutely beautiful, and something I try to also replicate in my life. He said, obviously once you're crossing, once you're into the sort of Promethean moment where human beings have definitely conquered the power of technology, and let's say they have acquired the power to destroy themselves completely. It's unavoidable that they would acquire it, but they will not use it because they want to live, and they want to live for beauty, and they want to live according to reason. So they will make the right decisions. This is very, very powerful and can apply to almost anything we're talking about. You know, I mean, the environmental situation, obviously, and so many others.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful thought. I think I could keep talking to you for ages, but we are almost running out of time.
We're almost done.
And there were two things I definitely wanted to ask you about, which I love to ask my guests, and I think I would be very curious to hear your thoughts. And first, it's on risk taking. So I would ask you, when have you personally, or what merit do you find in taking risks, or what does that translate to you, either in your role professionally or as a listener of music, or
Well, let's say risk taking means going away from conformity, and that is really also essential. I mean, conformity is not good. which is not, again, not to sound harsh, but risk taking is the essence, I think, of what we do. I mean, in my life, let's say the first big step was to move to Europe. I mean, you know, first of all, leave everything in Montreal, leave my job, and just come here, and without any real plan or safety net, and thank God. I mean, thank God it happened. I can give you examples from let's say on the live side of things with the festival. I'm really trying to present works that haven't been presented for a very long time in Canada, or some of them have never been presented, which could have you thinking, okay, it will be difficult to sell. But for instance, to be very, very precise, we're going to do the Schumann Paradis on Liperi with Nagano this summer.
Yeah.
It seemed as though the piece had not been played in Canada since 1885. So you can as well say it's really not in the fabric of the concert going live. Whereas in Germany, it's performed quite, all things considered, it's not a very, very famous piece, but it's performed quite regularly. And a lot of people were concerned that it would be difficult to sell tickets. And until the time when the pandemic hit, this was one of the highest, biggest pre-sale we had seen in recent seasons. And I thought, okay, could have gone the other way.
Yeah.
But it's there, and it just shows that you also need to trust the people a little bit. And
yes.
say, once there is trust, you can present them with something a little more extraordinary, let's say.
Yes.
And the chances are they will come. On the recording side of things, I mean, that's a broader discussion. I think it's a little more difficult, perhaps, because the let's say making a recording costs money like anything else, and still the current model of short and mid-term commercial returns on recordings makes it more difficult to be very adventurous repertoire-wise. At the same time, you have to do it, because this is also what contributes to your own position in the market, to your own
Exactly.
brand, to your own image development, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, of course, I mean, we talked about artists and performances earlier, but there's also a point to be made about expanding the catalog itself, the recording catalog, and creating important recordings of works that have been perhaps neglected, or even new works when we're talking about contemporary compositions. So yeah, but then you need to find a way to kind of evacuate the financial aspects out of the equation somehow. Yeah.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So that takes me to my final question for you, which is apropos the title of the series. When has music been revolutionary for you?
You mean for me personally in my life, or
for you personally?
generally speaking? Well, this is perhaps a little less musical than it is operatic or theatrical.
Fantastic.
I think for me, that I was also extremely fortunate in my university years that I could spend time in Europe between semesters, and I traveled extensively, and I consumed opera avidly in various European cities. I have been very influenced, I would say, by the tenure of Gérard Mortier when he was the director of the Paris Opera, which coincided, as a matter of fact, more or less, well, not more or less, actually exactly with Alexander Neef's, who was on your program recently, also his time at the Paris Opera before becoming the new director next year.
Yeah.
For me, this really encompassed absolutely everything that opera and music and theater should be, and the role it should play in a modern city and a modern society. And it was from A to Z revolutionary, so to speak, and sometimes it didn't make sense. Sometimes it really kind of, fell flat on its face. But that's precisely the beauty of it. I mean,
Yeah, right.
you create, you fail, you try, you take sometimes very controversial standpoints, but you help people move forward by doing that.
Fantastic. Renaud, thank you so much for this today.
Thank you. You're very, very welcome. And again, this is fantastic. I hope people will have enjoyed this, and I look forward to our next in-person.
Likewise. And for those of you who enjoyed today's episode, Renaud has also a beautiful playlist that we've linked below this episode that you'll find online. And so be sure to listen to it. It's got lots of interesting choices. And thank you again, Renaud, and thanks everyone, and see you next Wednesday.
Thanks much. Bye-bye.